Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we thank you for this time together. We thank you that you allow us to gather. Lord, we ask that you help us to listen to each other, especially in these times. We lift up those who are in danger because of what they look like, who they are, who you created them to be. We especially remember those who were killed in the attacks in Atlanta and their families. We ask that you give us a heart of love. Help us to stop dividing each other amongst and against each other. Help us to truly listen and hear with your ears, see with your eyes, love with your heart. Be present with us tonight as we go through this study, and help us open ourselves to you and to each other as we explore this material so that we might hear what you have to say directly to us and through each other. We ask and pray all this in Christ's holy name.
Amen.
So, you want to go through and read the beginnings of each one and then start?
Sure.
Who wants to start?
Okay. So for Monday, March 15th, the focus was on listening as an act of mercy and love. And the quote came from Cynthia Borgalt, who said, "Mercy is the absolutely indispensable lintel over which you step into the heart of God."
Tuesday?
So what struck you about this reading, Nancy?
Yeah.
What struck you about this reading?
Oh, I thought we were going to Tuesday.
Let's read each one all the way through, and then we'll go back and start talking about each of them.
Okay. Do we have time to do all of it?
We're just going to read the first little part.
Or just the,
So Tuesday was the power story, and the quote is, "Because we fail to listen to each other's stories, we are becoming a fragmented human race." Madeline Lindenwood.
Wednesday is the prayer of the path to love. And the quotation is, "In prayer we discover what we already have. You start where you are and you deepen what you already have. And you realize that you're already there." By Thomas Merton.
today, letting go and letting God. Go out of yourself and let God be God in you. By Meister Eckhart.
For Friday, the focus is listening through creation. And the quote is, "Those who dwell among the beauties and mysteries of the earth are never alone or weary of life. Those who contemplate the beauty of the earth find reserves of strength that will endure as long as life lasts." By Rachel Carson.
And Saturday is the fruit of listening. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. If we live by the Spirit, let us also be guided by the Spirit. Galatians 5:22-23.
Listening is a Sunday. Listening along the pilgrim's way. And the quote is, "I will be their God, and they shall be my people." From Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 17.
All right. I actually like doing it this way. I didn't think about doing it this way, but this actually is really kind of interesting, the way if you start in the beginning and kind of get that beginning foundation of what the week is about. Listening as an act of mercy and love. We talked a little bit about mercy last week, and I found it interesting because he, I guess, Robin, could be either one, I don't know. Started out with mercy as power, but then sort of pivoted off of that so that it's not just about power.
Did he say mercy was the, like, forgiveness or understanding demonstrated by someone with authority?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we said last
That's
week.
what last week
It was. But this week was mercy as an exchange,
Yeah.
which I found very interesting as compared, and actually that was the Oxford Dictionary that expressed it that way. But, an exchange for the frees us of all guilt.
Fault.
Is it fault?
Yeah.
Fault, I'm sorry. Fault. I thought that was really an interesting sort of way to look at mercy. Freeing us of all fault.
I think I thought of it in that way from last week is because Robin Grant opens Monday's commentary with listening as an act of mercy, but it's also, he said, or she said, that it was something understood that came from God, that, or others bestowed on that person, or bestowed on me. So it's something that I receive, not necessarily something that I can give, but it's something that I can receive. And really, we're showing mercy when we actively listen, aren't we? And hear the person.
Right, but it is, I can see it as an exchange, but I think, for me at least, that reading took the power out of it just being God-given mercy. We too give mercy if we are freeing others from all guilt. If we are, if I guess you think of, for me, it was thinking of things that I felt either were directed at me or happened to me or hurt me. And the act of mercy, to me, really connected with forgiveness. But this forgiveness, because of the mercy that we have, frees them from the guilt from our perspective. But does it free them from the guilt of their perspective? How do we work to hear their story in a way that frees them from the guilt of their own story? Those who would hurt us.
But I think that's one of the things, it's something that you need, but it has to be received. So you can have mercy on me, but if I don't receive it, if I don't accept it, then I have to be able to.
So without the exchange, the mercy is always one-sided.
And could mercy not be simply, rather than asking for forgiveness and giving forgiveness, it comes in the word of compassion and actively listening and when you're listening, you're not offering any judgmental comments like, oh, that's nice, because that's a judgment. You know, it's nice to me, but it might not have been nice to them. You're just actively listening, and you might give feedback. You sound like da-da-da-da, or it sounds like this, you know, but you don't give any judgment. And in that way, you're showing compassion, and you're letting them talk through it.
How easy is this to do?
Not at all.
I recall a conversation I've had just this week. As I said at the beginning of the study, I really worked very hard during the month of February and have sort of continued that. By the way, did you all know that Cicely Tyson grew up as an Episcopalian? Her autobiography is awesome. But I have spent a lot of time, particularly in February, and have continued it through Lent to learn more and more about how racism works, how I function within racism, what our experiences are, and how, and I guess part of that comes back to this, not exactly in the order, but hearing the stories, listening to the stories. And I had a conversation this week with someone that the words that were being said for me, I heard lots and lots of racism in it. You know, for one, they kept talking about the Mexicans coming across the border. And I said, stop there. Very few Mexicans are coming across the border. It's South Americans and those who are struggling. Because they kept saying, well, I just wish we could make Mexico more sufficient so that they wouldn't have to come here. When you define people of many nations as one, that's racism to me. That's what I was hearing. And what I kept trying to say to this person was, I've tried to put out there, I think we should be looking at this story or this story or this story so we can understand what's really going on in the mind of people of color. And
Or any disparate, or
any minority, but I guess because of my basic study, that's why I kept going back to that. We have to be careful of words. And if we never hear each other's story, I don't know how we can have mercy. And I don't know how they have mercy if we don't hear their story.
or if they only, and I know this is going to sound racist and it's being taped, but it's got to be a two-way street. The communication has to be heard, it has to be given, and it has to be received.
But it doesn't. It is not a two-way street.
And in order for there to be mercy, it needs to be a two-way
Well,
street.
here's why. For mercy to end up being, it has to be received.
But
and
therefore, in order to be received, it has to be given.
But when you're talking about racism, it is not their obligation to teach us. And it's not their obligation to tell their story. Because they are the ones harmed. And so it's like telling, let's use another example of how to get there. So the rape victim has to get up in front of the courtroom and get grilled about what happened to them. They should be able to tell their story. It's there. To grill them on a stand isn't helpful to them. That's not mercy to the victim. And that's why we have to readjust how we perceive our information of racism.
I guess that's where I'm not disagreeing with you.
I got you.
But when you use the analogy of the rape victim, it reminded me of a conversation I had with a friend of mine who was frequently becoming upset with me when I commented that I was disheartened that many of the statues were taken down. To me, it seemed like a knee-jerk reaction because we were denying all people of the opportunity to learn. And because without reminders and without the proper education, history will repeat itself. So I don't disagree that if we have an obligation to learn more, but there is also an obligation to tell both sides and to tell it honestly.
But the statues weren't doing that.
No, but that's just it though. We did not take the opportunity and spend the extra money that it could have taken to educate, to provide a secondary statute, to provide a huge plaque that explained what went on.
But that was proposed, and the people who own the statues wouldn't want that
I
in
don't,
a lot of cases.
but not in every case.
I,
No, not in every case. It was not proposed in every case.
that's a whole nother topic. I can just tell that's a whole
To
nother topic.
really take down statues.
That's a whole nother topic.
I know, but it gets back to the education.
It goes back to, it goes, honestly, it goes back to the power structure saying how we're going to teach this lesson. That's what we have to receive, is that's the power structure saying, you will receive this message this way. You are the victim, but I'm going to determine how you receive the message. That's what we have to understand when we're thinking of mercy in this exchange. We have to be willing to step back and say the victim is the one who has the right to express their story in their feeling.
Absolutely.
And that's the statue story that is the other side. And it goes back to that whole idea of until we are not equal, but justice is served. It goes back to the whole story of justice, where you have the three boys trying to look over the fence to see the ball game. And equality is you put the same box down, but justice means that sometimes one box has to be higher.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of, for me, that's what this is. This is this exchange to say, I understand that sometimes in this exchange for mercy, I have to give a little more.
Sure.
And that's why I say that, is we just have to put ourselves in another place. And it is hard. It absolutely is hard. But without the work, I don't think that the forgiveness or the compassion really come through as well.
But don't we have, regardless of, yes, the big issue out there in the world, or at least in the United States, and maybe the world, is race. It's discrimination. But isn't the bigger issue is that we're not showing mercy to each other?
No, we're not.
If we were.
We're not giving people dignity.
No. If that were the case, I don't think this issue, the issue of race, who knows, it might still be here, but I don't know that it would be as powerful as it is. Because obviously, somewhere or other, lines were drawn, divisions were created, and there's mercy for one, but there's not mercy for all. It depends on where you live. I mean, think about it. If you look back in history, the Southerners, woulda, coulda, shoulda, we don't know. My thinking is that if, I don't want that, but if Lincoln had not been assassinated, we might have a different world. Because if you look back at history, Johnson came along, took over from Lincoln when he was assassinated. And after, I want to say it was 6 months, maybe 18 months, he undid all of what Lincoln had wanted to put in place.
I have to study a little more about Lincoln on
That
that.
sounds funny.
You have to study a little more on Lincoln on that.
But if you look at, he reestablished the good old boy in the South. He reestablished it. Because before Johnson undid everything, we actually had black representatives in Congress. We did.
I don't think we had any black representatives in Congress during the
Oh, yes, I'm not saying not in Lincoln's time, but during that short period after, there were a bunch.
That would be something to
That's a whole nother.
There were a bunch.
That's a whole other. There were some. I would never call it a bunch, but
Not
there were.
compared, a bunch, there weren't, when I say a bunch, there were probably 10. Yeah.
But that didn't have anything to do with Johnson. Study some more
No.
history.
But then leaving did. Them no longer being in office did. Yeah, it did. You changed the whole thing. I'm not talking about Linda B, I'm talking about the vice president.
I got you. But,
Can I take us back to some place different that I thought, I know this is Saturday, we never, this going back to, because we did Sunday, Saturday was not included at all, Saturday, March 13th. I thought that was really an interesting reading, it's called Different Kinds of Fasting.
mhm.
Fast from words and decided so that you can listen, and that was by Pope Francis, and it was really a very neat list of another material reading. Pope Francis suggested the following list of things from which we can fast. The things that fast from hurtful words and say kind words, fast from sadness and be filled with gratitude. I mean, there's a list of like 12 things, and
Mhm.
I don't know, it's really neat because typically we think of fasting, as far as, what we eat or drink, but this is fasting from words or actions or bad thoughts
That made its rounds in Facebook too. I mean,
Really?
that list, it did. It made its rounds in Facebook.
Wow.
Yeah, which was really neat. Yeah, that whole idea of fasting from different things that we create.
Yes.
One of the things I wrote down here that I think could be helpful, and it's not something to do now, but it's just something I got from that Monday, is to take some time this next week and write a prayer to ask God for mercy for yourself or somebody else. And see how that sounds to you. Just asking God for mercy for yourself or somebody else. What is it that, I love these making it personal ones. What is it that you need mercy for, or what is it that somebody you love, or somebody you care about, or maybe somebody you can't stand needs mercy about? I think it helps us open up ourselves to see mercy in a different way. I don't know, it just came to me when I was reading this. What is your current understanding of mercy? Do you see how listening can be an act of mercy or love in prayer, or perhaps something you write? What words might you use to convey your desire to join your heart with God's heart? And I just thought, just thinking about what kind of mercy we may need, or what kind of mercy we're thinking of somebody else, kind of pulls these lessons into real life. That's what I kind of liked about that, making it personal. Those pieces really just kind of stuck out to me when I was reading the day-by-day ones. The power of a story. If you were going to tell the story, or you were going to listen to someone's story, how do you do that? How do you prepare yourself for truly hearing somebody else's story? Or how would you prepare yourself to tell your story?
I was involved in Celebrate Recovery for many years. If you don't know, Celebrate Recovery is a 12-step biblically based program that covers any hurt, bad, or negative that you can think. But that was a big part of those testimonies. And being able to have the opportunity to get up and share my story, and then having somebody come up to me afterwards and saying, I needed to hear that. Knowing that you've been there, knowing that you've gone through that, and it came out the other side, that gives me hope that I can too. On the flip side, side, seeing these people who were willing to get up, who were willing to let down their guard and become completely vulnerable in a group of people. It was awesome. You know, I heard some amazing stories. Granted, we had the, perk of anonymity. So I might see you on Monday night at CR and hear your story. And then run into you later in the week out of Walmart, and it would be like a completely different thing. Because I know your story. I know where you've been. I know where you're coming from. But that's your story to tell, not mine. I'm not going to go up and say, oh, hey, man, what you said Monday night at CR was awesome.
But either hearing the story or telling the story is an act of healing.
It is. And it's one of those things where I've told people since I got out of CR, we'll be talking and I'll tell them something about, something that's happened in my past or something that I've done. And I don't ever tell anybody something to get pity or because I'm going to say, man, look what I've done. It's all because I want to say, man, look what God has done in my life. Or this is where I started, this is where I am now. I was a completely different person 10 years ago. And where I was versus where I am now, it's all a God thing.
So how did you prepare yourself when you went to those meetings to hear somebody else's story?
Prayer, specifically asking God to open my heart, knowing that that person was probably scared to death to get up and tell their story in front of a bunch of people. It doesn't really matter how many times you do it. It's still scary to get up and bare your soul. So I would pray for them. Pray for God to open my heart, open my mind. And then just be prepared to listen. Kind of clear my head.
Anybody else want to share, not necessarily a story, but what you might, if somebody said, would you share your story? What would be something that you think would be healing for you or healing from them if they heard your story?
One thing for me is just someone being willing to listen to the story I'm going to tell. It's very honoring, and it makes me think higher of that person, that they're open to listening to my story, whatever it might be. Once they really listen.
And it's listening without judgment. So I think when you're in that kind of a setting, whether it's just a group, being involved in support groups, so people can share their stories, knowing that they feel safe. There's a sense of safety. When someone's going to tell you their story, I have to put myself in a mindset that I'm here to really listen to the person and accept them for who they are and where they are. I'm not here to judge. So I sort of like that openness and acceptance, not to no judgment. In terms of preparing to listen to the story, hear the story.
It's also very humbling when somebody's willing to share their story.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Very much. When someone tells me their story, I know I feel humble, but very privileged.
Yes.
Yes. I always thank people, thank you for sharing. Because I think it's so powerful when someone shares, and I feel so privileged to share an intimate, part of their lives. I think that is precious. It's a gift.
it connects you, right? Especially if it's a personal story, it connects us together. Because now I've shared something with you, and you've received something from me that connects us to each other. It helps us to see each other. You know, one of the things in preaching, they tell you to try not to do too much, is to tell too much of your personal story. And sometimes it's easy to do, but sometimes it's difficult to do. Especially when you first start somewhere, you want the people to get to know you. And so part of the story that you begin with is to tell these personal stories of how these biblical texts applied to your life or how your life interacted with these biblical texts. And I think that's, you know, for me, it's not scary. I mean, it used to be scary to think of sharing those personal things in a sermon context. But what God has taught me is that by sharing that with someone, it was like Miranda said, it's healing. But it's not just healing to the person that's hearing it, it's also healing to the person who's telling it. You know, for me to open up and truly be as transparent as possible, then people get to know who I really am. And maybe they see some intrinsic that I have that helps them say, oh, well, that's why he does that. Instead of, I wonder why he does that. That just doesn't make any sense. You know, it helps us to bind together who we are. What else does storytelling do, or how else might we listen or receive or tell stories?
It helps connect generations. You know, there have been many times that, you know, Janie's been in the kitchen cooking, and I'll go down and sit, and we'll just talk, and I love listening to her.
She got some good stories.
She does.
But has lived an interesting life.
But it's like that with, you know, any, for as long as I can remember, I'd rather sit and listen to the adults talk than go hang out with kids my age, because the adults told better stories.
Really?
And, but I don't know, it's just a way to connect to my age group doesn't really have the good stories to tell like the older generations do. And you don't hear things being passed down. I know that, you know, personally, our family, once my grandparents passed away, we quit having the big family get together, so you weren't getting those family stories that were passed from generation to generation anymore. And that just seems to be the thing. I know that most of the people that I know don't really do a whole lot of big family stuff anymore. They don't do a lot of big family get-togethers, so you're losing some of that family history, and with it, you lose that connection to the other generations that you get from stories.
This was a way of preserving culture.
Yeah, culture. You're losing that culture. Have any of you ever heard of the Storytelling Festival? I would love to organize a group to go. It's in a town called Jonesboro, Tennessee. And people come from all over the world, literally all over the world. And it's a week-long storytelling festival. And there's like 10 or 12 locations, and these storytellers rotate through, just telling stories. And some of them are just like reading a book, and some of them are true stories. But it's amazing. I went during seminary, we did it one summer. as a summer class and then extended out into that. But it was an amazing experience, and I've not been able to go back. And I would love to organize a trip. It's not real expensive, but it's one of those things that you just have to experience to understand. Some of them are in buildings, some of them are in tents, sometimes it's hot. It's not too bad. It gets probably a little chillier because it's in October. But it's just really a neat little festival that they do. And I guess they'll bring it back after COVID. I'm sure it didn't happen last year.
Well, the power of story also, I mean, that's how Jesus taught us.
Yes.
The stories mostly. So it's a way to communicate a message, a very powerful way of communicating a message through a story.
And the quote on this one, because we fail to listen to each other's stories, we're becoming a fragmented human race. Stories it can be just as damaging as it can be healing. Because if I, decide that I want to tell somebody my story and they blow it off or act completely bored the whole time I'm talking, that rebuilds some of those walls. It makes it a lot harder. I'm going to think twice before I decide to share my story again.
But the problem is not your story. The problem is that they received it. They didn't want to hear it.
Mm-hmm. But I know as a general rule, at least and I think a lot of, I don't know about men, but I know a lot of women, will internalize those things like, okay, I've said something wrong, I've done something wrong, there's something wrong with me in my story, not that person is being a jerk. And on the flip side, when you have somebody who doesn't want to share with you, who is so closed off that they don't even want to share basic stuff, it makes it really hard to make a connection and really hard to share anything. And, when you're talking about grace, mercy, compassion, love, all of those things, when you're trying to show those things to somebody and feel like it's just kind of bouncing off a wall, it can be very frustrating and it can be very disheartening.
But some people don't want to tell their story.
Yeah, and then you gotta wonder, what's going on in their life that they are so closed off and don't want to open at all.
And I think that's another key to it. It's hard to tell the story, and sometimes it's hard to hear the story. Sometimes our hearing the story is just as hard as them telling the story. The stories are painful to us because sometimes we find ourselves in it, and I've forgotten if there was somewhere I saw something. Was that in the storytelling that something was said about that? I don't know. Maybe that was just in my head when I read it. Something about hearing, being painful to hear the story because it, maybe we found ourselves in the story and maybe we found ourselves in the wrong, what we feel like is the wrong side of the story.
It was in the story, too.
Okay, well, it's there. I thought sometimes things come to me and I think I see them and sometimes I make them up. But I think that's the hard part, is being vulnerable enough to say, hearing that story that I feel like I'm on the wrong side of is difficult. Like talking to my friend. I said, I'm not pointing the finger at you. I'm just as guilty as anyone else. But allowing ourselves to be in the story, even if we feel like we're on the wrong side of the story, it helps us, I think it helps us heal. I really do. I think in some way it truly helps us heal, and it certainly allows us to see mercy in a different way. It's why I sort of like it like this exchange mercy thing, as opposed to all power, because I'm not sure I agree, and I can be wrong, but I'm not sure I agree that only the people with power can give mercy. Because I think sometimes mercy can come from someone doesn't have the power, and actually gives them power because they are giving the mercy. I don't know,
I
that's
think
just...
you just answered it. Because it all depends on how you look at it.
Yeah.
I think you just answered it. It doesn't necessarily mean, like the Oxford said, that you have to have authority over somebody. But in a sense, when you give mercy, you do have authority over that person. You're giving them mercy. You say, I forgive you. And that's a lot. That's pretty powerful.
And you're giving yourself power. You're taking that power back that God has given you, I guess, God has given you. Because God is in you, and you are created in the image of God, and therefore we all have power. It's just how we weld the power, or how we use it. And do we use it with mercy, or do we use it as bad?
Some nurses have to educate patients every day. I used to tell my students, if you went into nursing because you didn't want to teach, and I always taught one of the introductory courses, if you went in because you didn't want to teach, then you might want to reconsider going into nursing, because we teach every day, 20, 30 times a day. And what we have to remember is that it's like telling a story. You make a point, you plant the seed. You might not see the seed take root, but you hope that because you taught it or you shared the story in the right way, that seed landed, like in the parable, landed on soil and not on rock. But the sad thing, with being a nurse and acute care is that so often we don't get to see the end result of our teaching, except for maybe that the patient gets well and they do what they're supposed to do. They're never readmitted, but we don't.
And sometimes the stories you have to tell are not good stories. And that's probably hard as well. I don't know if you ever have to do that or not, Sue, but you have to tell the bad story.
You have to try not to take away hope. Not necessarily hope that, there's going to be a cure, but hope that someone is going to be there with you through this journey.
Yeah. The hardest story I have to ever I guess it's sort of a story I often tell people when I know, and particularly family members more than patients, when we know that they're really to that point, is to tell them that healing is not always in this lifetime. God promised us healing every time, but that does not necessarily mean physical healing in this life. And that's hard for people to hear. And it's hard for me to say to people because I know that it hurts them in the moment. And I don't say it to hurt them, but I want them not to. I guess for me, part of that is having one side of my family that was Pentecostal who said if you have enough faith and you believe enough that they'll always be healed. Well, they will always be healed, but that doesn't mean that it's in this lifetime. And so that sort of always is in the back of my mind. And I have to kind of read the family to see, is this the time when I can say it? I wish I could always say it to them so that I can, in some way, I think it gives us hope if we are people of faith. But it doesn't always. Sometimes that's not the story we want to hear. And hearing that story hurts more than living in the hope that maybe, just maybe, something will change.
I like what you said, that healing isn't always in this lifetime, and we have to remember that there are different
is appealing too, you know. And for some people to say, and I always caution my students, don't ever say it's going to be okay, because what's okay to you might not be okay to somebody else. You know? And the student or the nurse might think, well, it's going to be okay because I'm going to be here to help you get through this. I'm going to coach you. You know, I'll be with your family. But the other person might hear, it's going to be okay, I'm going to be healed. You know, and it's, you know, so we have to tell those hard stories.
What did you think about the prayer as a path to love? And if I'm moving through these and you want to go back, just say something. I love this part. What we need, we often already have. And that's sort of paraphrasing what he said.
I like comparison with the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, she could have always clicked her heels and gone home, but she didn't. She had a journey to take, and I don't think he says it quite that way, or she says it quite that way, but it is that way. There's this path, and we always are choosing how we want to walk that path. In some level, I really like these little bullet points they did. Beloved of my heart, what is your prayer? Your deepest desire for me, this person, this situation. And that's that prayer. God, what is it you want from me? Not just, I think so often we go into prayer is what we want. Even though we may tell ourselves and know subconsciously and sometimes consciously that God always knows better. Going back to that story, you know, I say to people when they say, why did my baby have to die? Or why did my teenager have to die? Or why did my husband have to die? And what I say to them is, if they didn't, and I don't believe it's ever God's will, I think it's God takes from what may be a bad situation and tries to make something good. We don't know where that person or what that person may have gone through had they survived this. We just don't know. We have no way of knowing. When my first partner died, John, he had a colostomy bag. He was probably going to be paralyzed on one side. And I think back after the fact. In the moment, I didn't care. Heal him at all costs. But you know, as I thought after I came out of that and thinking, you know, this was a man who loved to go to the beach. This is a man who was so active. And if he had to live his life with and he would have had a permanent colostomy, it wasn't something that could be reversed. And paralyzed on one side, that would not have been life to him. That might be life to somebody else, but to him, that would not have been life. And so, it's that, this is why we have to say, we don't know. We don't understand everything. But what God does is not, I do not believe, you will never convince me that God makes that baby die, or our child die, or our husband die. It is circumstances that come out that's what happens. But God tries to take that and use it for something good. Whatever it is, whatever, the Holocaust was horrible. Something good, we pray, came out of that. God took that and did something good. And so I have to keep trying to remind myself of that, because God says God doesn't want anything but good for us. So God's either a liar or God only wants something good for us. And therefore, I don't believe God makes anything bad happen to us. But it goes back to the free will I think we've talked about. You know, somebody else's free will interacts with ours. It's not fair. But as I often say, fair is where you eat funnel cake and corn dogs and fried rice. But it's that understanding that God always wants what's best for us. What do you want my prayer to be for myself or this situation? Gosh, I've never thought of thinking, okay, God, what do you want my prayer to be? It's always, you know, it's my stuff. What, if anything, is getting in my way of joining more fully and freely to your prayer, in your prayer, in God's prayer? What's in the way of me? And it's, to me, you can say prayer or you can say life. That can be sort of, for me, interchangeable. What is in my life that's interfering with our relationship? That to me speaks more than just prayer. Is there anything you would have me say or do on your behalf? How are we witnessing? What would God have us do to witness better to the love and care of others? To me, that's because God is love. That's what how can I do this better? What can I do to be better at this?
And that goes back to mercy. You know, we're treating everyone with mercy. I keep thinking of, I'm reminded of that part of D'Angelo's book where she was reminded that by her co-presenter that she was racist because she interrupted her co-presenter so many times. And her initial response was, no, I'm not. I treat everybody that way. You know, well, that's rude. You know, and if we're that way with everybody, then what message are we sending? You know, it might be in our culture for me to interrupt Miranda all the time, or Miranda to interrupt me, and we don't think anything about it. But really, in a civilized culture, we should be actively listening, because if we're interrupting, we're not listening.
That goes back to that listening for an answer.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that? The whole thought of this prayer as a path to love?
Well, for prayer, for this one, I think one is that there is a moment when you start to feel grateful. So you can even use this concept even for someone who may not have faith in God. But this is something that's being used even in psychology to help people. If you start your day, like people who maybe are depressed, and if you have them write down for each day, begin the day by finding some things that they are grateful for. And so when I do that, you know, when you get up and say, wow, I'm just grateful for being alive, or I'm grateful for my family, I'm grateful for whatever. And when you start doing that, you already, I think that's, you already feel like, ah, I'm so lucky, I'm so blessed. And so that's what spoke to me, that in prayer, that it has to do more with being grateful, acknowledging what you already have, the gifts that you have.
So somebody who may not be, it may not be prayer for them, but it allows them another way, even if it's not prayer, just to kind of still be a part of it, even if they can't think of it as prayer.
Right. But I think it's really helpful, even if you don't believe in prayer or in God, even if you can begin your day by being grateful, whether it's to Mother Nature or just being grateful because I'm alive and I have all these gifts, and that sets your day good and positive.
go and letting go. If you've been around long enough, particularly if you ever go to the 10:30 service, I pick on Ann a lot. And Ann says that she has this thing on her refrigerator that says, "Good morning, this is God. I will handle all of your issues today. I do not need you to help." Or something to that extent. I think that's what this letting go and letting God says to me. It's like, it's true. But they're gonna kind of hold on to a little piece of it that I think I can fix better than you.
I saw one on Facebook this morning, maybe it was yesterday, that it was, the gist of it was a phone call between God and Jesus. Here it is. "Calm my spirit, Jesus." Oh no, they're having coffee, sorry. "Lisa, come close. Listen to me whisper to your soul. Gather in your mind, I've got you, girl." Then Lisa says, "One sec, Jesus, let me check on the coronavirus on Twitter one more time." And he says, "I'm trying here, Lisa, work with me."
How do we work to let go and let God?
I don't know, I saw that.
Of course, like I say this, but I don't do it very well. This whole idea of prayer. The whole idea of prayer continues to allow us to give more and more of ourselves. It's that idea, that list. What do you want me? What of me as I pray? God, what do you want me to pray for? God, what do you want me to do? What do you I think that might be easier than letting go and letting God, is to begin at least by saying, what is it you want me to do? And then maybe it's a little easier to let go and let God. It's kind of like that building the relationship, that whole following that back part. You don't start by having somebody stand that far away and you catch them. You start by being closer. So that if you start falling back and they don't catch you, you can stop yourself. And to me, that's kind of that whole, it's a building process to get to the letting go and letting God.
There's a theory out there about interaction. And basically it's, you get to know the person and they can't trust you and you can't trust them until you know them. And the name of the theory is of becoming and knowing or something like that. Of being and becoming. And it's all about getting to know the person, and as you do, then trust evolves.
It's hearing each other's stories.
And hearing them with them.
Yeah. Actually hearing each other's stories. Not just listening to each other's stories, but actually hearing each other's stories. And I think that's a real difference. There's listening and there's hearing. What about listening through creation? This one drives me crazy. Especially living up in the mountains of Colorado, I would always hear the people say, "Oh, well, I don't go to church because I worship God in the wilderness. I worship God on horseback. I worship God while I'm fishing. I worship God while I'm walking." Well, guess what? That's not what church is about. But creation is a place. And for me, I think creation is a safe place. I'm remembering this trip that I took to the monastery of Gethsemane, which is in Kentucky. It's where Merton was, in his hermitage. And it's a silent monastery, believe it or not, I loved it. As much as I talk, I loved it. But there was this path on the other side that were prayer stations. All through that you walked and you stopped at each station and people would leave little notes, and some of them were folded and you didn't read them, but some of them were put on the board. And to me, that was that whole idea of being in creation you're praying, but it's a safe place. There were prayers there that were folded that, I don't know, some people probably didn't read them, but you left them there and kind of trusted that people weren't going to read them. And then there were, you come along and but there were some that weren't there. They were there for you to see, but it was a safe place. Barack Obama, in his the Promised Land, talked about going to the Great Wall and sticking the prayer in the wall. And evidently the reporter pulled it out as soon as he left so he could share it. It was not a safe place. But I think sometimes, of course, granted, if you're up in the mountain, sometimes you may not feel so safe in creation. But it's that idea of communing with what God created. It's why I said, I think it was week before last. We think of the sanctuary, the nave, as being a sacred place. But if God created it all, it's all sacred. There's no part that's not sacred. And we forget that. We designate these places as being more sacred. It's why, it doesn't bother me that kids will run in the church. But if we don't create safe places for them, no matter where they are, then they start to, again, it's a division thing. We start dividing things out. And I just think creation has to be a place of safety. But and sometimes we hear better in nature. Though who was it? Was it last week they told the story about being in nature and it was so loud?
Yeah, that was Randall.
Randall Curtis was someone being in nature. I didn't realize nature was so loud.
There's also the creation, if you want to take it a step further. There's the creation, like you said, the nave, the built environment. And what have we built? Have we built it as an honor, to cause us to think about, where we are, or, is it a prayer, whatever.
Well, Jesus talking about the temple as being God's house. But then at another time, God says, you can't put me in a box, basically, when he talks about the tabernacle. You can't lock me up in here. Yeah, so I think all those things. Any other things we think about as listening through creation? The fruit of listening? I think that's what all this, the storytelling does, is tells us the fruit of listening.
Wisdom.
Wisdom. We're passing over. This is bad. Okay. Listening along with pilgrimage. I thought that was really interesting, this whole pilgrimage idea of listening. So this is a couple of thoughts that came out of that. What is your story of walking in faith? What is your pilgrimage of walking in faith? What is your story or pilgrimage of walking in mercy? Where do you find yourself on that path of mercy? What is your story of walking in sorrow? That pilgrimage of sorrow. Because don't we face all of those at some point? And we have to walk those paths. That's part of that healing process. We can't heal if we don't walk those paths. And so how does that fall in line with listening along the pilgrimage? How do we hear ourselves as we walk in in our different areas as pilgrimages?
Don't we need to, isn't the pilgrimage a part of embracing at the time, whether it's mercy or sorrow, or what was the other one? But embracing that emotion or that feeling and honoring it.
I don't know what I'm writing up here.
Because without, some people are afraid to engage because they don't want to be disappointed. But if you don't make that attempt, you'll never know.
Well, and isn't it, even if we're disappointed, didn't we learn something just the same? And I think sometimes what we learn is that we can't say it, and instead what I hope we learn is that we say it in spite of. Because there's a lesson to be learned. Whether it's a lesson to be learned that we should think differently, or it's a lesson that we should learn that maybe there are preconceived notions. I think there's always, in listening, we always gain something. I think that's
the toughest thing, the transition from face-to-face to virtual. And knowing when to interact, when to respond. So many of my colleagues don't come on camera, so you don't have those visual cues. And without the visual cues, you don't know if they're pausing or if they're through, or, and you don't want to be rude and interrupt, but it makes it much harder. A Zoom meeting is much harder than a face-to-face meeting, for me anyway.
well, and when you have 20 people, even on Zoom, I can't tell. I can't tell if you're supposed to say something or not.
Well, and if you all come on camera, then the bandwidth is just tiny. So, there's just connectivity over there.
And let's be grateful because we're still being able to connect. Thank you to the technology, or we would have been totally isolated.
True.
So,
Yeah. I mean, it is really true that if we want to look at one of the graces of what's happened, is that we had technology to still stay connected even in this time of COVID. Because even 10 years ago, even 10 years ago, we would not have been disconnected. There's no way we could have been disconnected.
A church in Springfield that we're friends with, people that go there, told us that not only their attendance has increased in person and online, but totally intentional, but what's it called, the giving, that's increased. People are sending in tithes from.
I don't even know how they're getting that, because nobody's giving through that.
They're getting tithes and offerings from all over the United States.
That's amazing, because our virtual attendance is over 100 most weeks. But there's nobody sending money. There's not money coming in. And that's not the whole point of it, but
Do we have an automatic background? EFT?
we don't. But we do have a way for you to give electronically through Tidal. And it's on our website, it's on our Facebook page. All you have to do is click the button and fill out the information. We made it as easy as I know how. It doesn't. I won't say that. There are some that give that way, but most of the people who are giving that way are our people already.
Yeah, with the time, you can set up a recurring on it.
I'm sorry?
You can set up a recurring with the time
Okay.
as well, so.
Yeah.
how did you like doing the covering the whole week as opposed to just one day?
I like it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
How did you like covering the whole week rather than just one day?
Yeah, works for me.
I really liked it, but I have to admit I read them all in one day.
I read them all in the last hours. Because I couldn't find the papers. I didn't read them all. My thought was, that'll move me to read the car on the way to Little Rock. I can just start at the beginning
seen that window over there last Thursday. And I was about to go pray when I walked in here and went, it's my neighbors.
Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we thank you for all that you allow us to experience together. We thank you for allowing us to be here together, to open our hearts and our minds to each other and to you. We ask that as we leave this place, we remember the lessons we've learned. We open ourselves to hearing each other, truly listening and walking together, because we are a community of faith that needs each other, who depend on each other, who lift each other up when we fall, who we look to and are excited to see when we get to be together. We thank you for the lessons you've taught us in this time of COVID, and we thank you for all that we can see in hope, because you have all the power and control, and help us to let go and let you do what you do. And we ask and pray all this in Christ's holy name.
Amen.
Thank you.
So when do you leave?
A week from Sunday.
Okay.
So I'll be there next week. We're going.
Just not Monday, Thursday.
My favorite one.
Well, it's going to be different because it won't be foot washing, but it's,
Well, and I wish COVID, if I were more familiar with the area, I'd probably try to seek out a congregation, but I don't know anything about St. Louis. I'm not going to risk it and put Leon.
I don't know if they're, I would tell you the cathedral in St. Louis is awesome. They really are amazing. I don't know who the dean is right now, but it's an amazing cathedral. It's where I first became acquainted with the kids playing at church. Over on one side of the day, I mean, it's of course a lot bigger. Kids play that whole side. It was just awesome. I mean, it's a little louder because it's like a church.
It's huge. Yeah.
We do the same for next Thursday, Friday, guys.
Yeah.
All right.
So, anyway, I'll be here Thursday.
Cool.
Unless a pie breaks, so,
Yeah, don't be breaking no more pies.
Lori is in, so we'll be